and welcome to this podcast series celebrating the 30th anniversary of the National Fairground and Circus Archive. In this episode, Aranza talks to Professor Brendan Walker, an aeronautical engineer and a Renaissance showman who applies art, design, psychology, science, and engineering to explore the experience of thrill, making him the only thrill engineer in the world. Professor Walker regularly works with Fairground showmen, designing new technology to develop the experience of the Fairground ride thrill. One of his most famous rides is Wicker Man at Alton Towers. Professor Walker graduated in aeronautical engineering at Imperial College, London, and obtained his MA in industrial design engineering at the Royal College of Art. He is currently a professor of creative industries at Middlesex University and has previously held posts as Deputy Head of Design Interactions at the Royal College of Art, Principal Research Fellow in Computer Science at the University of Nottingham, and Associate Lecturer in Industrial Design at Central St Martin's. He is also the Managing Director of Ariel, a company specialising in the creation of tailored emotional experiences, the founding director of the Thrill Laboratory, a collective of scientists, technologists, artists and designers creating thrilling experiences, and Studio Go-Go Limited, a ride design company supported by Innovate UK. Brendan has made extensive TV appearances, including in Blue Peter, Bang Goes the Theory, BBC's Tomorrow World, and the Discovery Channel.
Brendan, what is your link to the archive?
Gosh, my link goes back now over 20 years. That's quite a wake-up call. It was still when you were the National Fairground Archive, so you had to formally include the circus aspect into the archive. I started to become interested in fairgrounds back in the early noughties when I was looking at aviation disasters. My background's in aviation. I was interested in entertainment, and I was looking at the slightly dark world of air disasters as a sort of public spectacle. And there was a fairground that I'd found in Epping Forest, Yates's Retreat, which was almost at the site of a 747, a Korean air disaster. And there was something about aviation and fairgrounds and the history of fairgrounds that got me fascinated, wanting to know more. And I needed to know, find out where I could just go and look at the history or find out interesting stories. I got one book. I remember getting this book before I came to the archive, and it was an account by a Fairground showman called Keith Nichols. It was called "They Seek Him Here, They Seek Him There: True Stories of a Traveling Showman." And it was when Keith Nichols talked about operating rides and watching riders' faces and controlling the speed of a ride, and that relationship between the two, that I really got interested in the role of the showman as well. And I think that's where I really then started to look hard, going, well, it's not just about this sort of ephemera of fairgrounds, but it's also about that culture of showmen and their importance in rides. And so I think it was via Vanessa. Somebody had suggested Vanessa Tooman to me, and I went to visit Vanessa up at the National in your in your bunker, in your archive bunker up at Sheffield. And immediately I was just met with the smell of archives, the volume of stuff that was in there and that was laid out on tables. I just knew, I was there for a morning. I just knew that it was, I wouldn't say impenetrable, but I was only just going to be scratching the surface. And I was lucky enough to even have Vanessa there just for half an hour to introduce me to the vastness of the collection and what was actually hidden in there. But that relationship with the National Fairground Archive continued with Vanessa introducing me to George Irvin, who obviously a great fairground showman today with a great tradition. I think I also became aware that the archive wasn't just, well, a dead archive. It wasn't just a thing about the past. It was contemporary as well. It was constantly evolving. Vanessa herself, having, coming from Fairground Showman tradition, and her relationship with the Fairground Showman community built upon this solid bedrock that was being grown, the archive itself. It was just, yeah, mind blowing. And also, I felt like I was actually becoming part of the fairground scene rather than just fiddling at its edges and looking from the outside in. So I suddenly felt very much embedded in a living, breathing cultural phenomenon. I think that relationship continued with George Irvin and with Vanessa into the very first project I did, which was supported by the archive, which was a project I did with MIT in the States. In fact, a group called the Media Lab Europe group, which was based in Dublin. I worked with a scientist there to create what we called the auto portrait machine. It was a machine which riders would wear. It would take photographs of riders, a single-use camera, take photograph of riders at their peak moment of arousal. So we were looking at human physiology, how people get excited when they're on rides, what point on a ride do people get excited, and then we were going to take a photograph of that face, so using an automated system. And again, it was exploring that relationship between what does the operator see, what do the spectators see, what emotions are the rider expressing, and it was kind of a celebration of that. So that particular series of photographs, portraits, are held now in the archives collection, which was really exciting for me. So George Irvin has a set. I mean, the whole thing was sponsored by the Wellcome Trust. They hold a set, and we're still exhibiting those photographs. And for me, those photographs still represent, I think, the rawest, sort of very visceral connection I have to the archive. I still use that project to illustrate the interconnectivity between all those various different components, and the fact that this is living and breathing, and also to excite future sponsors or funders or partners about the possibilities of the fairground, its tradition, and its sort of contemporary value in the world today. And one of the direct results for me of doing that work with the Media Lab Europe and creating the auto portrait machine was I continued that line of investigation, looking at the relationship between human physiology, ride experience. And I wrote a small booklet called The Taxonomy of Thrill, which I published 20 years ago. In fact, it's held in the archive today. And that book was a blueprint to for other designers, anybody who had an interest in designing thrilling experiences, and ride designers in particular. And the very first thing that happened once I published that was that the Tussauds group, the Tussauds Studios, who were managing the development of Alton Towers, Thorpe Park, Chessington, they bought 13 copies of that book for all of their creative directors across all their brands. And for 5 years, I became an external consultant to the group, looking at future ride design, future cultural trends. And so I think that again is just another example of just how that initial engagement with the archive had a direct impact on, well, the global entertainment business now, which is worth, I don't know, something like $50 billion. So yeah, and that all came from the excitement I had on my first visit to the archive.
Can you share your thoughts about the archive? What does it represent to you?
Well, I was looking back at the David Braithwaite's Fairground architecture book, because I wanted to get this term right. There was an old Romany term called the toba, which represents, it's sort of quite an ephemeral term, but one that's slightly fallen out of use in fairground language. It's sort of the magic that a fairground showman brings together between lots of disparate items. So, they may have rides of different types, big rides, medium rides, games of chance, food, drink, the showmen themselves. So it's an odd collection of people coming together, and this odd collection of people will travel. They'll appear in a space, and somehow that formulation creates this magic, the toba, which when a punter, a visitor to the fairground enters, they're suddenly met with this, well, just magical mix of components. And I think for me that the archive itself has some of that toba about it. It's not just documenting it, but it's, you can find various different aspects, different lenses onto this world, which is, well, by its very nature, alien to most of us, because the fairground, the traveling fairground, and again, apologies, I'm not covering circus, but fairground is my love, my passion. But the traveling fairground, when it arrives at a site, it may come twice to a town, or traditionally it would, and this whole spectacle would appear. So it is quite alien. It's quite exciting. So for me, the archive, and particularly living in London, though I am from Sheffield, so I have a little bit of affinity as well with the university. When I visit, it's a very special time. It's a special place. There are lots of real things there, from original posters and hoardings, playbills, even receipts. There's stuff. So that's the first thing that I think that the archive represents to me. It really captures that magic, and you really want to become immersed in it. But there's ride machines, so I can't get over the engineering. And you will I'll probably talk about this more, but the machines as well. The knowing that there are records of these machines that have been fabricated to deliver a thrilling experience to an audience. I mean, coming from a aviation industry and knowing that just what movement can do to the human body, how it can excite the human body, to be immersed in that world where you're seeing other engineers tackling with the same things that I'm trying to tackle today, now working in the industry. For me, that again is magical. Also, coming at it from a business perspective as well. So now that I am creating and touring my own rides through, well, let's say Studio Go, for example, making our own virtual reality swings, which we're touring, I am increasingly moving from the gaze of being a spectator or a researcher. I am now a ride maker, owner, operator, and I am now tackling the same issues that fairground showmen have been tackling for centuries. How do we get customers through the door? How do we get them to pay? How can we get a queue to form? And so again, there is documentation, there's evidence of advertising and marketing and showmanship. And I find that, and this is tacit knowledge. This isn't something that academics or consultants have come up with. This is tradition which has been grown upon generation after generation. This knowledge is invaluable. Imagine if you started from scratch and said, we need to learn how to do this. Well, either you can go to the government and say, look, we need a £5 million government grant to understand this unusual question about how do we market and advertise rides, or we look at 400 or 500 years of tradition. And I would much rather, because rides are very people centered, I would rather learn from people who've been experimenting over a long period of time. So again, it's invaluable, and that's what I feel. Again, yeah, I'm actually it's tingling a little bit when I talk about it, because it is that magic. It just excites me so much to be immersed in that world and to have discovered it as well. I just hope more people find out about what you're offering.
How do you think the archive is significant in academia?
In academia, I blow hot and cold about academic interventions into cultural phenomena. In a way, maybe it's a bit like the observer effect, we would say in physics, that certain things have evolved outside the scrutiny. In fact, actually, the fairground in particular being sort of almost a sort of subculture or on the fringes, been a thing that maybe polite society in various times of history have not wanted to partake in. It's been left to evolve. It's been left like a sponge to absorb cultural influences, societal changes, trends, to become what it is now. So in some ways, I'm slightly reluctant to, even though I look at it and try to learn from it, I'm also feel there's a, I don't know, I'm just very aware that I don't, whatever commentary or influence I take from it, I am aware that the fairground community know very well what they're doing. And that is a living, breathing, say, contemporary practice. We're not going to be learning, I suppose, reflecting back to that community. We are, I suppose, what I try to do is learn, celebrate, say thank you, and say, I'm going to take what I've learned here and try and apply it over here. So I think what I can learn is vast, but also has to be very respectful and acknowledge the traditions I am learning from and borrowing, from. But there's also other things which intrigue me, though aren't my own particular current area of research. So, for example, things like British tradition, national identity, which is also captured by fairground tradition. And the fairgrounds having their heyday during the Industrial Revolution and the Victorian era, and that's all wrapped up with British Empire and the distribution of British innovation across the empire. We're now in an interesting period of colonialization. There's a very interesting thread to be unpicked here, which is looking at how British fairground tradition, British entertainment has permeated across the world, and for some good and some bad reasons, I'm sure. So I think we've had great influence, and I think the British fairgrounds that exist today is still a shining example. But I think there is clearly an international impact that it's had. And that is something I would like to know more about. So when we think of the National Fairground Archive, I do think there's an international story in there that I would like to learn about more, particularly because as my own work, somebody who's now dealing in digital technology and particularly with virtual reality, I can actually transport my software to India, to Africa, to Nepal. And these are all countries we're currently looking at working with. We can set up rides there. They can experience the work we're making. We can transmit these things internationally. And I'm kind of aware, and in the conversations I'm having with local artists, Indo-futurists, Afro-futurists, that there's a cultural sensitivity now about the visual artwork that's being portrayed on rides. Again, the visual, the audioscape that Fairground represents is hugely exciting. But how do I now, as somebody bringing rides into those different cultural traditions, how do I work with local artists to create artwork and content that is relevant today and is sensitive? So I do need to learn and be sensitive to these things. I'm aware that it's happened before, and to what effect, I don't know. But again, the archive would be the place I would start that line of inquiry, no doubt.
Is there a collection or a theme in the archive that has had a specific impact on you?
Thinking about what's excited me most about the archive, I was aware of your collection of blueprints of existing rides. I wasn't entirely sure where they'd come from or who the originator was or who the company was. And this was clearly back, 20 years ago. And I was aware that they were in a shocking state, whatever it was. And there's a whole body of work that needs to be done as, conservators and curators to actually just document this vast amount of, some cases, crumbling paperwork. But I knew that those were the key to the things that get me really excited, because I was trained at British Aerospace, and there's a long tradition of fairground showmen like the Ailey brothers, who came from the aviation industry. Ailey Bridge Company, again in the US, with their scrambler rides and the fabrication techniques using aluminium and pot rivets, which were all, being pioneered in the aviation industry at the time. There's a close relationship between aviation and fairground rides, and not least because they are both involved in moving people in space over time. So, fairground rides have a very close relationship to aircraft trainers, for example, flight simulators. I was trained at British Aerospace at the end of the 80s, so 89 to I was there till 95, just as computer aided design was becoming popular. But I was still luckily at the cusp where we were still trained as manual draftsmen. And so I know what it's like to put pencil to paper to create a drawing on foil, which will then physically become a blueprint, will be replicated to become a blueprint, which will be shared, will be held in drawers, will be created into blueprints, which will be shared with people on the shop floor who are making things. So there's a materiality to that process of innovation, which really excites me, right down to the evidence that's left on the page, construction lines, which are used to create complex curves, to calculate things. So they may even be on the side of a page. You can use trigonometry and other techniques. There are magic tricks you can play with drawing techniques to work out all manner of different things, very complex shapes, just using rulers, set squares, and a pencil. All this evidence kind of sits on the page. And I'm kind of used to going through those calculations myself still. So it's that level of detail that I was looking for. And it's when you invited me, or answer to the Alton and Spooner exhibition, which you had, it was the Engineering Fun exhibition in 2022, that you said, well, we've been working to clean up, to document the collection, to start the process of digitizing these drawings. Well, you took me down to your new room with all these amazing blueprints in, and I was just allowed to go through that collection, the Orson and Spooner collection. I don't know. There was some were, I have to be honest, as an engineer, boring, right? So and we all know, for every single ride that's made, somebody will have had to done a drawing for let's say a Whitworth threaded bolt. Okay, that's not going to excite me. But occasionally you'll come across a general assembly of all these parts, which shows you a ride. This is what the showman or the engineer, Alton and Spooner, this is what they were envisaging when they started to draw these things. And there was a couple that really stood out for me. Bearing in mind, I do suspect I have a condition called hyperphantasia, and I was looking into this. So I have the ability to look at drawings and to not just imagine what it might feel like to be, let's say, on the end of an arm that's moving through space, but I actually physically feel myself moving, and I can make myself sick by also imagining this. So I've got quite a vivid imagination when I look at drawings. So there's an extra level of excitement that grabs me when I look at a drawing and imagine what is moving and how I might be moving. So the first ride that really got me was the whip. Now, this is a ride which is, it's a flat ride. If you imagine it as a kind of lozenge shape in plan view, it might be 10 meters long. And there's a sort of just traction train that runs around the circumference of this sort of lozenge shape. Then sort of fanning out from that conveyor belt sort of on its side, running around, are arms. And at the end of each of those arms, there's a little carriage. And the linkages on that arm are a little bit flexible, they're sprung. So if you're going down the straight edge, your carriage will be going along quite nicely. You get to the corner and suddenly, and here's its name, the whip, the arm will accelerate as it goes around this bigger radius. because the inside's still moving at the same speed, but the tip of it is now going, well, you might be going 10 times faster than you thought. You go initially from no acceleration to suddenly a massive amount of acceleration on this curve. And that's what causes the whip, and hence the term whiplash as well. And there's a sweet spot there for it to feel great, but also not to cause injury to riders. And it can be unexpected. And I think the genius thing about that was that it's not a hard linked arm, it was sprung. So as soon as you get whipped around the corner, you'll bounce back a little bit. And so there'll be this really nice sort of dampening wave that will occur as you go around the corner. So that ride, I want to sit on that ride because I just know it's going to feel great, and I want to sit on it with somebody who laughs. There was also a photograph which caught my attention. And again, I don't know if it was either Orson and Spooner, I imagine it was one of their craftsmen. He was carving the track for a waltzer. And, obviously the waltzer has that undulating sort of feeling as you go round. And there's a kind of magic relationship between that sort of sinusoidal undulation, the speed with which you're rotated. And the track is the thing that programs the ride. The track is the thing that will lift the cart up and down and give it that lovely sensation. So not only was it the crafting of that curve, which I know because I saw the drawings, would have had to be calculated using these special drawing techniques, but also the craftsman had his plane, and on the floor was just a massive pile of the tiniest wood shavings. And I know that any vibration on a wheel running over that surface is going to translate into sensations felt by the rider. And it would have to be super smooth, or they might have kept it rough if they wanted to be making a rough ride. I mean, this was all part of crafting. And I think it was that materiality and direct relationship between the drawings, the craftsman, and the ride experience. So that photograph for me, and there are many other examples in there, really captured my imagination. Again, got me excited about making rides, not just studying them. But I think one of my greatest loves are swings. So, we've been touring our swings, like we've done 4 continents now. I design swings, whether they're cantilevered from trees, whether they're freestanding cubes, and we create virtual reality experience for these rides. And I've drawn in various occasions different types of swing boats because I think it'd be a great experience for 2 people to experience together. But I came across Alton and Spooner's original blueprints for their swing boats. To anybody else, it might just look like an A-frame. It really was just a triangle and a boat, sort of, carriage suspended in the center. But the first thing I did was going, well, how high is that A-frame? Because I wanted to know how long the pendulum was, because I wanted to know how long it would take that swing boat to swing back and forth. So again, applying very simple physics. And then when you realize, okay, it's going to take maybe 8 seconds for a boat of that, for a pendulum of that length to go backwards and forwards, then you start to get a sense of going, oh, I can now kind of imagine the kind of momentum this thing is going to get. And also, well, how many times does somebody have to swing back and forth to feel like they've had a good ride? So I know on our swings, we aim for around 25 to 30 swings, and people think they've had a good go on it. So again, thinking, okay, with these swing boats, they're going to be getting 2 people through every 5 minutes. And then I start thinking, how much money can they make in that time? So in that drawing, I'm suddenly trying to decode all this information, which I know through the kind of accounting books that I kept. There may be other evidence there that I might be able to find. But the real jewel in the crown, I have to say, was finding the photograph of the swinging gym. I don't know. I think there might be 1 or 2 examples still touring in the UK. I think there are some powered versions of this, so which are the steamboats. If you ever went to Carter's Steam Fair, so as a rider, well, on the swinging gym, you would stand up in a little carriage. Maybe there's 2 of you. So imagine there's a sort of little, well, like a phone booth, let's say, a big phone booth. You both stood in there with a bar in front of you, holding the bar. Now that phone booth has got 2 arms coming down from a big central axis in front of you, and you're just sort of suspended underneath. And as you rock your body backwards and forwards, the booth is swinging backwards and forwards, so you can put energy into this thing. But because of it's a 2-arm linkage, you're always going to end up standing upright. So you never actually rotate at the same time. But the trick is if you put enough power into this thing, you can do a full loop the loop. Now, I know that I can make a virtuality experience that sits on top of that physical experience that feels absolutely fantastic. For me, I look at that with opportunities with 21st century technology eyes applied to it, and also the complexity of that engineering and the ingenuity that was going on there to create something which was a physical experience, that was direct relationship with operating the ride. That I think epitomizes, I think, the kind of gems that, I know exist in the Orton and Spooner collection, which is why I know coming to the archive, I may come with one idea of things I'm going to learn, but I will tangentially or laterally just discover like hundreds more things which are going to excite me. Maybe that's a problem. Maybe it is just too exciting at the at the archive, and maybe I should just be more blinkered when I go. But it's really hard when you say you're immersed in let's call it the Toba of the archive.
Thank you, Brendan. It's always very interesting talking to you.
Thanks for answering. It's been great fun.
Thank you for listening. For more information on the archive, please visit the University of Sheffield website at www.sheffield.ac.uk.